just to clarify for those who may not know, so the gentleman on the left-hand side of the screen, at least it is, at least it's my left, in the red, I'll put it that way. The gentleman in the red, his name is Zion Lexx. And I guess broadly speaking, he subscribes to the more Hebrew Israelite. Well, I don't know, yeah, I guess he would consider himself a Hebrew Israelite.
He's a Tanakh only Hebrew.
Tanakh only Hebrew Israelite. He's of that community. And then on the right-hand side, you have Professor James Smalls, who's over there in the blue. Now, Professor James Smalls would be definitely considered one of the OGs, of the specifically of the Kemetic tradition.
Yep. And
he also deals with West African religions, and I guess he probably would say just kind of African religions or spiritual systems in general. So that's kind of who we're dealing with here.
There are people who base their entire lives and even livelihoods on these foundational systems. And I think that in our community, one of the reasons why this conversation is so important is because those who are conscious of the belief system of our ancestors, we want to make a clear distinction between how we embrace, even cultivate and envisage the God of the universe versus what our enemies told us. So we need to have that distinction on record so as to know for surety that we are not partaking in the religion of those who are kidnapped and stole us. So one of the reasons why this is important is because
I'm actually going to stop it already, man.
All right, go ahead.
Already, what Zion Lexx said. He said, for those of us who have an awareness of our, our ancestors, spiritual systems, so forth, basically his whole thing was we want to make sure that we're not engaging in the spiritual practices of our oppressors. That we want to be certain of that,
Right.
And I find that fascinating because I think that, and it'd be interesting to hear him expound more on that. But it's, to me, put it this way. I got a martial arts background. I'm not saying like I'm Chuck Norris or anything like that, or whatever, but you
got them hands.
Yeah. I did a little bit, you have to have a solid base, particularly when I think about like judo, for example. If you're off base, if you're off balance,
right,
then you're engaging somebody else, then it's easier for that person to overtake you, right? And so I look at critical thinking the same way. If you're starting off on the wrong foot, if you're already off balance, in terms of the way that you approach a particular issue, then the more and more you get into it, you're going to be overturned, towards something fallacious, something false, something erroneous. Okay. And so what I hear, and I'll put it this way, what this made me think of, I'll try to be as charitable as I can, but what he said, what it made me think of is a form of the genetic fallacy. Now, most people, a lot of times we talk about the genetic fallacy, we're talking about how there's actually, it's a two-sided definition. One side of it is if you reject a claim or a position based upon how somebody came to believe it or based upon its origins, right? Typically, we understand the genetic fallacy that way. But the reality is, it's actually a two-sided fallacy in the sense that it's also the genetic fallacy to adopt, a proposition
because of where it came from.
Because of where it came. Yeah, exactly. It can happen either way, right? And so, when we think about, the ancestors, he's like, okay, well, for those of us who have this awareness of the ancestors, and I say this all the time, is that you can have, let's say that exactly where you come from in West Africa or whatever, and let's say that you have, through archaeological study, through understanding the oral histories and what have you, let's say you just have a full description of what it was that your ancestors believed. So what they believed. That still wouldn't answer the question as to whether or not what they believed was true. You got to go an additional step, to have justification for then affirming what it is that your ancestors believed. Because just because they believed it, that don't mean it's true. Why should you believe it? Why should you adopt it as a spiritual system or worldview or what have you, right? And then likewise, the flip side of the coin is, let's say, even if it were the case, that, these white folks come in, they're the enemies, and they just ransack Africa and impose Christianity. The question is, the world is what it is, independent of what we think about it. what I'm saying? So even if some people are using, certain realities or truths in a wrong way, that doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden not true.
Right.
So, for example, the same enemies had a mathematical system that related to buying and selling Africans. Then they use mathematics to buy and sell Africans. Now, does that mean that addition is false?
Right.
Does that mean that just basically mathematics should be rejected? Right. No, I mean, because mathematics reflects something about the real world, and so likewise, when we think about the historical realities of the resurrection, we think about the broader worldview of Christianity, then we can demonstrate that there's good reason to affirm Christianity, regardless of how Europeans engaged in it, and professing Christians were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And so when I hear somebody say, oh yeah, with this awareness of my ancestors, we want to make sure that we're not participating in the practices of the enemies. My thing is, what's more fundamental is evaluating either system for its truth value, right, and not just who used it and who subscribed to it. The question is, what is the truth about the belief system or worldview, spiritual system that these different groups subscribe to? That's what you really want to get at.
Yeah, what I always like to say is, 2 + 2 = 4, even if Hitler says it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it doesn't matter where it comes from. Truth is truth, regardless of where or whom it comes from.
Exactly. When you're dealing with objections to Christianity, I'm saying, or really anything, to be honest, it's helpful to be able to identify what kind of objection you're dealing with. Okay. Now, actually, I'm using these terms. I got this from reading Alvin Plantinga. This is kind of how he divides it up. But there's, broadly speaking, there are 2 kinds of objections to Christianity that you're going to encounter. It's going to be de facto objections or de jure objections. Okay. Now, de facto objections is pretty much how it sounds. I mean, it's just, basically saying that Christianity or some aspect of it is factually untrue. So this be claims like Jesus never existed, God doesn't exist, Jesus didn't rise from the grave. People are saying that this or that is factually untrue. Okay. But when we're talking about de jure objections, that's something totally different. That's the kind of objection where people are saying that there's some other reason to reject a particular position, like it's irrational, illogical, or it's immoral. I'm saying those are the kind of categories that Alvin Plantinga lists as being de jure objections. So it's not about whether something's true or false. Is that this particular claim or spiritual system or belief or whatever has some other quality to it, aside from whether it's true or false, that still warrants it being rejected. Okay, now,
and the de jure, wouldn't that be more about someone opposing it based on their own worldview?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have, there's going to be some basis. I'm saying, and actually, I'm glad you said it. So, for example, this notion of Christianity being anti-African, right? Now, it could be the case that Jesus rose from the dead, Jesus is God, everything about Christianity could be true, what I'm saying, and somehow, for whatever reason, Christianity is anti-African. Now, that's not the case, what I'm saying, but my whole point is whether or not God exists, the factual, whether that's factual or not, what I'm saying, is independent of whether Christianity is anti-African or not. Right. You see what I'm saying? So my whole point is, that would be an example. So like in our context, this notion of something being anti-African, and people making that allegation, that's a type of de jure objection to Christianity. So when Zion Lexx says that, it was what our enemies used when they stole us or something, however he put it, or basically he pasted in the category of worldview that is on that European side of the coin. That's a de jure objection. I'm saying it has nothing to do with whether Jesus rose from the dead or whatever. And so my whole point is, we want to be kind of keep track of that when you're engaging people, because what I like to say is like, okay, that's interesting. My question is, let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about did God exist? I mean, does God exist? Did Jesus exist? And let's get down to the facts of the matter. I'm saying, sometimes it is important to engage the de jure objections. I'm not saying it's not, but it's helpful to keep those categories in mind. We engage in people.
And also, does your worldview even allow you to make that objection?
Yeah, true, good.
Right, because one of the objections you showed was it's immoral. Like, well, based on what? Where do you anchor your morality in? Because if there isn't anything, then at best you could say, I don't prefer Christianity, as opposed to saying that it's
True.
morally wrong. You know what I mean? So
True. Absolutely. Absolutely.